Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rumblings podcast. I am here, as always, with the venerable Murray McCormick. Couple of things more than a couple of things to talk about. There's always an infinite number of things that can be discussed when we're talking about the Roughriders, but they're coming off last Friday's 23-16 victory in Vancouver and looking ahead to Sunday's Labor Day Classic against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So look back a little, look forward a lot, I think, as we launch another podcast. Mur, looking ahead to Winnipeg, toughest challenge of the season for this team, and they get that 3 out of the next 4 games. What's your take on what's coming up?
Well, I know we're not looking back as much as we can, but remember this time this week it was all doom and gloom. It was like, how were they ever going to even stay competitive with Winnipeg? What was going to happen? And they go out and win a game, and boom, everything's kind of sunny in Saskatchewan, which it literally is. But I still think Winnipeg's arguably the best team in the league. I think I don't see many holes. They aren't blowing teams away. They're winning games, but good teams win games they should win, and the Blue Bombers have been doing that other than that one loss. And I think Captain Obvious checking in here. The Riders are going to have to play as well as they did against the Lions and another step up to keep going to beat the Blue Bombers. And I know they can be had, and I know the Labor Day magic, and I know all the other things that come into play. But man, you try to think of a reason why the Riders should beat the Blue Bombers, and it's hard to come up with one other than they've gained a little bit of momentum, but. Boy, Rob, we're gonna get a big sampling of them for the next 3 or 4 games, and I just don't see a happy thing. And another thing can happen is the Bombers can clinch a playoff spot with a win on Sunday in the Labor Day Classic. So the Bombers have something more to play for. Like, I don't know how long you've been around, but playoff spot clinched by Labor Day. Have you ever remember seeing that very often? Maybe last year, but I don't remember. Last year was a weird season, but boy, I don't remember very often a team being able to clinch its playoff spot by Labor Day.
I'm a Denver Broncos fan. By Labor Day last year, I knew that the Broncos were going to miss the playoffs.
Yeah.
So things can be pretty much nailed down by this juncture in different circles. But it strikes me that the Roughriders, they had a margin for error against BC. And I think they've had one for the vast majority of the season to date, because by and large the teams that they've played have had deficiencies. The exceptions being the first 2 games against BC when Nathan Rourke was there for most of the time. That margin of error is gone against Winnipeg. If they allow 7 sacks, if the offensive line continues to be as porous as it has been this season and was on Friday in BC, the Roughriders have no chance. They got away with it on Friday because BC didn't have a quarterback. Now you're playing a Bomber team that will make you pay. So there's no such thing as a perfect football game, but the Roughriders have got to play their best football game of the year, bar none, to prevent this from being a Winnipeg victory, and one of probably 3 that the Bombers will have at the Roughriders' expense, unless the Roughriders can play a much cleaner game than they did on Friday. Clean in terms of keep your quarterback as untouched as possible.
44 sacks in basically a half of a season allowed by the Roughriders. That's a crazy number when you look at that, and it's well on pace to hit the 80 mark by the end of the season.
Well, not quite 80, but 44 sacks after 11 games. That's 4 a game. That would put them at 72.
72. Well, I'm giving them a couple. I'm expecting the Bombers to get a couple extra
but
ones.
Maybe the Bombers to get 15 this week.
But, and it's funny because you would think the offensive line might show some improvement, but then they took huge steps back. I think Andrew Lauderdale's a pretty serviceable tackle. I really think he can be. Jamal Campbell is the word is out. And I wonder if some of those sacks maybe should have been tackles for losses more than sacks too.
Well, one of them was a run pass option where Cody rolls to the left and got hit. So that wasn't by design a passing play, but because the quarterback is tackled behind the line of scrimmage, they called it a sack. So that would be 6 sacks against instead of 7. But there are times when Cody is a little uncomfortable in the pocket and may kind of almost try to almost navigate himself into trouble as opposed to trusting the protection. And Craig Dickinson's mentioned that a few times. Now, in Cody's defense, what reason is there to trust that protection? So I think if you play up behind that offensive line long enough, you're going to be a little jittery. I think that's just human nature.
Hey, Rob,
but he sure overcame that.
I kind of reminds you, they gave up 7 sacks and still won.
They still won.
They
still won.
And kind of nicely. It was a nice win.
Oh, it was a tonic in so many ways. It's just the cautionary note that has to be sounded looking ahead to playing Winnipeg with Willie Jefferson, Jackson Jeffcoat, Adam Bighill. They're going to eat you alive if there's continued porousness along the offensive line. And that's just the reality that the Roughriders face. I contacted Steve Daniel, the CFL's amazing statistician. I asked him, how often has a team won historically when they've allowed 7 or more sacks in a game? And the answer he gave me was just over 20% of the time, which actually was surprisingly high. I thought it might be 10. But there are instances, this dates back to 1977 when they started logging sacks as a stat. But there's Candy's tail. But it's about 20% of the time. And every now and then you can get away with one. The 2007 West Final in BC, Cameron Wake, I think, had 5 sacks by himself against the Roughriders. They allowed at least as many sacks as they did this past Friday, and then they won the West Final, I think 26-17. So you can do it at times, but can you do it against Winnipeg? Not a chance.
Could Frankie Hickson
unless somehow the Riders can sack Zach Calero 7 or 8 times and it's a saw-off. That's not going to happen, I don't think.
And it's funny, you look at the numbers on Winnipeg's sack totals, they're not they're not as eye-boggling as the Riders. The Riders had like 44 sacks and Winnipeg's got like 34 sacks and Winnipeg has 22. So they're not getting to the quarter. They're still getting to the quarterback. They don't have the numbers like the Riders seem to do in their sacks and their pressure on the quarterback. But we do know what Willie Jefferson and Jackson Jeffcoat can do, and they can come on any time. And they could get 8 sacks between them easily on Sunday in the Labor Day Classic.
Especially when you look at the Roughriders' weakness along that offensive line is their tackles.
Yeah, their tackles.
That just would seem to be tailor-made for Winnipeg, unless the Roughriders can just scheme their way out of it, can bring in some extra protection, or there's an upgrade in performance. But this is a team that in 2019, Cody Fajardo's breakout year, over the course of that season, the Riders allowed 37 sacks over 18 games. Barely, just 2.2 a game.
Yeah. And
now they're allowing 4 a game. And yet people kind of wonder why Cody Fajardo's performance has changed. Look at the change in performance in front of him. Mm-hmm. It's not really a lot more complex than that.
Do you think Frankie Hickson can do it again? Do you think he can come up with over? He had a great game. As I said in that, I thought he was a bit of a slasher. He has power. I was watching the game over again. I loved how he actually kind of sought out contact with guys. And you want him to win the opening. We know that, but it's nice to see a guy with that confidence and that power to run into other players and to do those things. And what a game for him. And can he do that against the Blue Bombers? I don't know. I kind of think the Lions were still. And I'm looking back on this, we're still reeling from the Rourke injury. I really think there's a bit of a leftover from that. And then who believed, first off, the Riders would face Canadians quarterbacks in back-to-back games and then hurt Canadian quarterbacks in back-to-back games. Just a weird sort of situation with Michael O'Connor getting hurt. Not quite sure when. They're talking a leg injury, and I know we all watched that sack by Darnell Sankey on Michael O'Connor when he picked him up. And kind of, I know people are saying that wasn't a roughing the passer call. He planted him into the ground, and the CFL doesn't allow that you to do that anymore. You can't pick up the guy and drill him in the ground. Now, having said that, I don't know what Sankey does differently to avoid doing that. That's the part. Like he just tackled him. He just was a football play.
At some point, it's physics. How do you interrupt your momentum in midair?
Exactly. So,
that was a cheesy call. But if you look at it, though, the Roughriders got away with one. Or they got a really cheesy call on the illegal contact late in the game on Carmen Moore. That, if you're really stretching the interpretation of the rule, that's a penalty. But that was a really cheesy call. So anybody who's lamenting that call against the Roughriders should also look at that game and say the Roughriders got a drive-sustaining penalty against, or benefited from a drive-sustaining penalty against BC. And that's as ticky-tack a call as you're ever going to see.
I kind of thought the Riders had a chance at maybe catching the Lions a little bit at that win and progressing ahead, but we heard this morning that they've got a quarterback, not Canadian, but it's Vernon Adams. They traded for their first round pick. I think it's 2023 to get Vernon Adams over there as a quarterback. So now we've all seen it. Vernon Adams seems to have this mystique about him that he can do things and keep getting them. I think this might be his fourth team, Montreal, whatever, a lot of teams. And so I think the Lions needed to get a quarterback. They needed something because I don't know O'Connor's status, and General Pipkin's okay, but I don't know if he's a starting material.
Well, he's as journeyman is going to be. And so what the Lions had to guard against is 2014 Roughriders syndrome. The Lions are now 8-2. You were in Winnipeg one day in 2014 when the Roughriders beat Winnipeg 30-24 to improve to 8-2. But it was the costliest of defeats or costliest of victories in that Darian Durant was hurt, and the Riders were 8-2 at the time, and they ended up just sputtering through the rest of the regular season, and then came the playoff game at Edmonton where they Kerry Joseph was intercepted 5 times at age 41
in the first half.
And so I think there was one pick in the second half, and then he was out. But there was also a touchdown pass to Corey Williams. Riders lost 18-10 in Edmonton, but the thing that they've got to be cognizant of is you don't want to be in a situation like the Roughriders were in 2014, and they've done a pretty good job of that. If one wonders what would have happened in 2014 had the Roughriders had, say, Kevin Glenn as their number 2 quarterback. They went and got Kevin Glenn the following year because they wanted to guard against that situation. So the Lions have been aggressive in ensuring that they've got a reputable passer. And that is interesting because had that not happened, I really wondered if the Lions were just destined for a tumble, that if the Roughriders could capitalize on that with some timely victories, maybe a home playoff game wouldn't be entirely out of the question, because Calgary's still pretty close to the Roughriders. But now I think that that was a really savvy move by the BC Lions.
A first round pick, and I know I'm not saying anything about the draft, but that's almost like free. Like you're waiting. What's it for another Canadian offensive lineman? It seems to be the first round picks to be wherever the Lions would likely end up picking. Would have been a pink. So I think it is a very savvy deal, and it's interesting. It comes after
the Roughriders could use a few Canadian offensive linemen right now.
It's interesting. It comes a couple days after the Alouettes and Gary Stern announcing he's stepping aside as the not stepping aside, but just stepping aside, I guess is the word, as the it's his day-to-day operations of the team, and his 25% ownership, and he's going to let the estate of the other owner of his other partner kind of operate things. And
Sid Spiegel,
yeah. And it's, boy, should we be worried? Like, I seem to remember a little while ago I was in Halifax, and they're talking about 10 teams in the CFL and expansion, and now, they need another owner for another team in a market that's struggles. And maybe this 10-team dream is a little bit too soon, Randy Ambrosi. Maybe you're going to have to focus on what are they going to do with, unless how much the estate's going to run things. So obviously is it a coincidence this happens a couple of days after Gary leaves? Because I think he was a pretty staunch supporter of Vernon Adams. At least I seem to remember reading that on Twitter. So is this a sign of what's ahead for the Alouettes? I'm not quite sure. But
you would think that the estate or the people responsible and entrusted with the estate are going to look at it and think, well, this enterprise is a money loser, and they're going to have to unload it, you would think. And then the question becomes, who's next in line? Is there still some promise there? Is there still a way to sell it to local interests? Because there was an Eric Lapointe group that was very interested last time, and for whatever reason the CFL wasn't as interested in that group as that group appeared to be in the CFL. Or is that scorched earth now because there had to be some bad feelings over the way that whole thing went down? So you got that. You've got last week there was a game in Toronto, and it was so well attended they didn't even list the attendance in the stat sheet.
Yeah.
And so they could have. That's an area of concern. You look at the crowd in Edmonton last week. So
and remember in 2019, the CFL operated the Alouettes, and it was about $600,000 per team to keep the Alouettes afloat. Little different situation in 2022 with COVID and a shortened season. Did teams have $600,000 that they can just sort of throw at the Alouettes to keep them going. So I think there has to be a good sense of urgency to find some sort of ownership or get a commitment from the estate on what their plans are for this team. And it's always we're kind of things are looking up for the CFL. The games have been exciting. I don't think we can argue about that. You don't turn off the TV or watch something else because you never know. You can turn it back on and it'll be a 17-point lead and it's tied. So the product on the field I think has been pretty good. And it was when I was in BC, I've got to give them credit. Like they were getting not blown out, but the game was well in hand, and the fans were still having fun. They were playing all sorts of games on the big screen, and I really have to admit, in my experience of going to BC, I always felt like I was the youngest person there. Just look out over the press box and be full of gray hair. It's kind of like a Mosaic Stadium, but there was a younger crowd, seemed to be more females, a little bit more females. I don't have any figures on that, so maybe the Lions are making a comeback. A great tailgate party. I was there for back-to-back nights. There was a football tailgate party, and then for the soccer team the next night, which was pretty cool to see the different sort of partying. So the Lions are making a comeback. We're talking about good things. The Elks have got their issues. Whatnot. I think Chris Jones will get that sorted out sooner than later, we hope. So, but it just seems this Alouettes seems to cast a bit of a pall over the league heading into arguably the biggest weekend, one of the biggest weekends of the year.
This is a CFL. There's always going to be something. Yeah. There's no easy ride for the Canadian Football League. And I guess you could look at it glass half full and say they've come through COVID without losing any teams. And without a complete catastrophe.
You,
so there's that. But and maybe the Roughriders have come through the worst of it too. They'd lost 4 out of 5. And the one victory over those 5 games had been in Edmonton, where the Elks did everything possible to donate that victory to Saskatchewan. And if you look back to July 8th, the Roughriders won that game, and that was tainted by the whole Garrett Marino mess. So there hadn't been a lot to celebrate with the Roughriders, even when they'd won. There was a Garrett Marino game. There was the victory over Edmonton, where the Elks were just a mess in terms of discipline. So the Roughriders needed a out-and-out victory. And you can look at that game last week and say, well, BC didn't have its starting quarterback, and that starting quarterback happened to be the best player in the league. But was anybody feeling sorry for the Roughriders on July 24th when they got hit by COVID, and there was already an accumulation of injuries, and Jake Dolegala, the third-string quarterback, was starting, and there was a makeshift receiving core, et cetera, and the Argonauts came to Saskatchewan and won 31-21. So maybe things just even out. BC was in an adverse situation, but look what the Roughriders faced on July 24th against Toronto. So nobody seems to mention that when they cite that the Roughriders were playing a team without a starting quarterback. And nobody seems to mention, they'll say, you look at Cody Fajardo and what he did a week after being pulled after throwing for just 41 yards against BC. He had 2 throws that exceeded 41 yards, or 2 passing gains that exceeded 41 yards this past Friday. 321 yards, 38 yards along the ground, and completes a big 2nd and 7 pass to Kyron Moore to salt away the game. What he did a week after being pulled was terrific, and I don't think he's getting nearly enough credit for that.
Yeah, I agree. I think
imagine me defending Cody Fajardo, but here we go again.
And there's other reasons for optimism, like Braden Lenius is back, a big sign. I think that's a big signing, Rob. I think when you look at the potential of the receiving,
can he play left or right tackle?
Well, he's tall enough. He's got
that's where the money should be spent.
Yeah, but regardless, he's still back. You look at the receiving core now. Possibly when we're looking down the road, maybe even for the Labor Day, you've got Lenius, you've got Keon Schaefer-Baker, Duke Williams could return, Shaq Evans. He says he wants to be back by Labor Day. We'll see what happens. And Kyron Moore, he was
pretty emphatic on Twitter that he would be back.
Yeah, so that's a pretty impressive receiving core with the Canadians like Emilus and McInnes. Emilus. Picton and the other ones backing up. McGinnis backing up. I don't know what McInnes' status is going to be, but there'd be. And
he was coming off a 6-catch, 111 yard game.
We're on the offensive line, and rightfully so. But I think there's the way that Hickson played and the way that the possibility and the potential of this receiving core, coming back to what we kind of anticipated the roster being at the beginning of the season with and we kind of thought Linnaeus would be back because he'd been released soon enough. But he's, Craig Dickinson mentioned the other day that they're worried about what kind of football shape he's in. And then I was watching in the huddle on Access last night, and Marshall Hamilton says, if you're a professional football player and you just been cut from an NFL team and you're not in shape, well, shame on you. It's nothing to do with the team. Braden Linnaeus knew he had opportunities coming here, so I don't think Braden will be out of shape. I think he's going to be. He may not be CFL shape, which is different, bigger body in the NFL, bigger, more of a less running. Was going for tight ends. There's not as much receiving. He may have to adjust to the waggle again and things like that, but. I kind of thought I'm kind of excited to watch these receivers, which would be kind of fun.
If there's time to get the ball to them,
yeah.
I'm really interested in what they do with Kean Schaefer-Baker. His first game as an inside receiver in the CFL, and he played inside receiver in college. 5 catches for 170 yards. I'm just intrigued by what Kean Schaefer-Baker could do as an inside receiver if they were to leave him there.
But I don't think they can put. I don't know what they can do with him. I don't know who they move outside. But I will bet when the ball is snapped, Keon Schaefer-Baker is going to be closer to the quarterback than you think than being out with that wide receiver. Jason Maas is going to have offenses that get him to, kind of like when Rob Bagg was here. Rick, Rob Bagg started as a wide side receiver with the wider hash marks. But a lot of times he would end up starting the play being quite close to the quarterback by moving around in the backfield. So I wonder if we're going to see more of that. I would think that's the way to get Keon Schaefer-Baker to utilize all these guys. I get the sense, Rob, from you that it's almost a negative if Keon Schaefer-Baker doesn't go to the slot back. And I think Jason Maas might be able to take advantage of that, as I said, and move him closer to with setups, and when the ball is snapped, he's closer there. So I think that game had to be a real indicator that you've got to take fuller advantage of Kean Schaefer-Baker. Exactly.
Take advantage of the waggle. Take advantage of the size that he gives you inside. The CFL's elite receivers are by and large slot backs, and Kean Schaefer-Baker is emerging as one of those. The potential there is amazing. I look at, again, I'm going to go way back here, but Joey Walters was a good wide receiver, a very good wide receiver. They moved him to slot back late in the 1980 season. In 81 and 82 is the best receiver in the league. And you can do so much more with a receiver, an elite receiver as a slot back than as a wide out. I will always wonder, as tremendous as Matt Dominguez was as a Rough Rider, what if he played inside? Yeah. When they signed Matt Dominguez, I remember Danny Barrett saying that he thought they had another Alan Pitts. And then they put Matt Dominguez out wide. And he was still very productive. But why didn't they play him inside like they played Alan Pitts inside? Riders late in Matt Dominguez played one game in Calgary as somebody who had repeated knee injuries in 2008, and a hobbled Matt Dominguez, I think, had 100 receiving yards in the first half before getting hurt. Mm-hmm. And playing inside. And I will always wonder, what could Matt Dominguez have done if he'd been inside all the time or most of the time? And not a direct parallel there, but Kean Schaefer-Baker, but I really wonder what they've got here if they put him in situations where it's just more practical to get him the ball, and there's just more advantage that can be taken of his skills that I think they've only scratched the surface as far as letting people see what he can do.
I meant to look this up, but he's amazing with yards after the catch. I wouldn't be surprised if he's leading the CFL in that category. You saw it in BC, like with that long pass, that long tuck, he just scoots, and he caught the one off the tip ball. But he gets those yards after the catch. I remember him telling me that his coaches said, that's what you got to do, catch the ball and get yards, which sounds pretty basic, but it is. Look, some guys just get yards and they drop, they don't get a whole lot more. So I'm impressed with that. And he's also a really personable young guy. He's kind of having fun with it. It's kind of nice to see a guy enjoying that, and he's always upbeat and chatty after games and practice and stuff. So he's a guy I think the fans know about, but I think they can start embracing him a little bit more. And then hopefully a game in the Labor Day Classic, and it's such a fan-oriented event with what's going on Saturday and then the game and everything, that maybe they can get to meet with that. He's a pretty special young player. With the free agency and how long he's going to be around here is a question mark a little bit, but boy, he's going to be fun to watch.
There'll be a premium to be paid for him, and I'm not sure the NFL won't be interested.
Yeah. Well, I thought Brady Linnaeus
just so much athleticism there.
I thought Braden Lenius would have that kind of attraction too, but you never know.
He's not as dynamic a player as Kian Baker.
What about the defense,
Baker's
Rob?
just got. What about the defense? They're going to have to exert more pressure.
Yeah.
They only had one sack last week. I think they're going to need to put more pressure on Zach Collaros. And but overall, that was a pretty sound defensive showing.
Yeah.
They had some Jeremy Clark and Amari Henderson had some key knockdowns. The linebacking core continued to be the linebacking core, which is to say very good. Defensive line was a disappointment in that they didn't create the kind of havoc you would think that they would create.
But that's a great offensive
playing against
line.
a team.
That's a great offensive line on BC. Better than the one that almost led to Michael Riley being killed. They've improved.
Yeah, and they've shown patience with it. But the Roughriders' stock in trade is their defense. And one of the things that they've done very well this season is rush the passer. And that's something they didn't do very well in BC. They had opportunities for some sacks. They didn't quite finish off the plays. One thing I'm wondering, what did they change? Like, why on offense? Why was that offense so much better than it was a week ago? Why was Cody so much better? What did they adjust?
Oh, he's more mobile. Is he more mobile? He trusted his run. He trusted his legs. He took off. He did the run pass options. I think that was the whole thing. This was the Cody. We saw some Fajardi and spinoramas. And I just think that was the big thing is Cody trusted his legs and he felt better. And that kind of set everything up to everything. And he could plant his leg. I think it was his mobility. I think everything. I know he had,
is there going to be that much recovery in a week though? Like they must have done something schematically to allow that to happen too. Because it was like watching two different players.
Cody bought himself time when he needed to, and 7 sacks aside, he bought time when he needed to get moving around, and maybe this knee is getting better. That's something. That's the only thing I can think of. This knee is improving, as he said it would. He's still got to wear the brace, but still got to do things, and maybe he needed that kick in the butt to be benched. Maybe that was something. Said Cody took himself home. He mentioned that confidence comment, and he said that was his confidence was kind of bruised because he got pulled. We kind of know what he's like, and we're not going to get in a big argument about that, but I think his confidence was really bruised. And I think maybe he went home and examined himself and said, I have to get back to playing the way I played. And Jason Moss had to get back to getting Cody the plays that he can run. And I really think it's mobility, Rob. I know you have other theories or things like that, but I just think that it was a return of Cody of old.
It seems like he was. Sometimes if you hit rock bottom, maybe it could be a pretty sobering thing, and that was certainly rock bottom for Cody as the Roughriders starting quarterback, save for one pass that hit the crossbar against Winnipeg in the 2019 West Final. But in terms of an overall performance, that was clearly his worst as a Roughrider, and it was in a situation like that, you either succumb to it or you get better, and the way he responded was admirable. And yet I hear the post-game shows and people are still complaining about Cody Fajardo. I don't know what people expect from this young man. I really don't. I think it's gotten so beyond silly here with the way the quarterback is being dissected. Cody's performance on Friday should have been met with nothing but applause and admiration, and yet you still hear it. And that pass to Kyron Moore was a little high. If that pass was accurate, he would have scored. Blah 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 blah. He threw for 321 yards against one of the league's better defenses behind a terrible offensive line. I mean, honestly, and how is he not one of the performers of the week after that? I just don't get. I don't get things anymore.
I was golfing with some guys yesterday, and one of them was quite critical of Cody. And it's interesting to hear. And I'm going like. And he goes, they got to look at something different, all this kind of stuff. It's going like, where do they go? Like, Cody's their guy. He really is. I think people have to understand that. And you've been quite adamant about that too. And so is Craig. Cody is their guy this season. So, you're going to have to be critical. Yeah, critical, but also take a look back and credit the things he did and what he did in that game. Now, if he does it in back-to-back games and one of those against the Lions or the Bombers, wow, that's going to really kind of change the attitude because looking at the Banjo Bowl, they traditionally have their issues going to the Banjo Bowl, and I know should be more well prepared on that, but that's next week's game. I'm going to go 1 week at a time for this guy, one game at a time, one practice at a time. And but boy,
The
if we
Badger
can,
Bowl is traditionally ugly, at
it's
least in
ugly.
recent
Yeah,
years.
I don't remember much of the second half of them, other than it's a great party and stuff. But Rob, I'm going to throw this at you. What does Labor Day mean to you? Like, let's just have a little. We have a minute here too. Just what is the Labor Day class? And I know it's the Labor Day weekend classic, but man, we're going to save words when we can. But what does the Labor Day classic mean to you?
Here's what it means to me. I'm getting on a plane on Sunday morning at 6:10 a.m. in Kelowna to get back in time for the game. That was the only flight I could get to get back. My godson Eric Anderson is getting married on Saturday at 4:30 p.m. to Lauren Martell, and so I'm
They don't have
going to the
TVs
wedding.
in Kelowna?
I leave Friday, and I didn't want to miss the game. I've been to every Labor Day weekend game since 1975 when the Riders beat Winnipeg 27-23. Tom Campana had 326 all-purpose yards. The Riders scored the game-winning touchdown. Ron Lancaster to Steve Bazurek late in the fourth quarter in the north end zone. They won 27-23. And so I haven't missed a Labor Day. Last time I missed a Labor Day weekend game was 1974. And so I don't want to miss that game. So there was one way to get there, and that was to get on a flight at 6:10 a.m. on Sunday.
Kelowna to Vancouver, and then Vancouver to here?
Kelowna, Calgary, Regina. So that's any other flight gets me into town later in the afternoon. So I'm going to be a mess on that flight. Thankfully, the pilot will have had some sleep and we'll get home in time for the game. There's nothing like it. Even in the bad years, there's something to extract from a Labor Day Classic. In 1999, the Riders won 3 games all year. Their third victory of the season was against Winnipeg on Labor Day weekend, and then they lost their next 9. So even in when they've had bad teams, they've had great Labor Day games. 1983, the Ken Clark game. The Rocky Butler game 20 years ago on Thursday. So this Thursday of this week, it'll be 20 years since the Rocky Butler game. 33-19 victory over Winnipeg in 2002. So even predating that, the 1976 game against BC, which was a classic. Lancaster to Dawson for 18 yards for the winning touchdown with just under 2 minutes left. And the Ray Algard Joe Pau game in 1986. 56-yard touchdown pass late in the fourth quarter. I mean, they're just, Pill Country 2019, John Ryan and Brett Lother. The Kerry Joseph quarterback draw. There's a book to be written just about the Labor Day game and Labor Day weekend game. And I don't know if I have another book in me, but I'd love to do that one. They're just, that's a big part of my childhood that's turned into a big part of my adulthood. And that's why I'm blearily getting on a plane 6 hours after the wedding reception ends. So,
I'm more of
that's a long dissertation, but
I'm more of an
I got to get my money's worth for that flight.
I'm more of an atmosphere sort of feeling emotional. It's like I remember sitting on Hemorrhoid Hill with my daughters watching games at Old Taylor Field and the noise and the stuff and just how cool it was. I'm as a beat writer and as a reporter going to the game, sometimes we used to cover the pregame stuff and just seeing the fans there, reminding myself of how much the CFL means to people and how fortunate we are to have our jobs that allow us to go to these events, to send our words out there, to let people know what we get to do. And I just love the atmosphere. I remember at Old Taylor Field and all the party people would be over that house over to the right-hand side of the drive of the front of Mosaic Stadium, all the Bomber fans partying there. I don't know if that happens now. I haven't gone there, but just that kind of, and the Bomber fan, and then watching the people party and celebrate and how families get together and stuff. It's just it is a celebration of football. And I've been to Labor Day in Hamilton. It's a long time ago, but it's not the same. There's something about the Labor Day, and there's that old cliche football season starts after Labor Day, which I totally disagree with. But I think the love and the atmosphere and the passion for the CFL does kick up another notch after Labor Day because with something more to write about. We're writing about more than features and stuff. And as I said, I'm an atmosphere guy. I know you can remember all these games. I'll never forget Kerry Joseph's draw. I'll never forget Brett Lother jumping into Pill Country and all these other things. And who's the guy who broke his leg? I'm trying to remember the guy. Winnipeg Blue Bomber. That's a long time ago, but that stands out in my mind. But just the Labor Day Classic is a big weekend and one we're going to enjoy. And I admire you for your flying. I came back You can't make any plans flying these days because you never know what's going to happen on your way when you got.
I'm not going
flights.
through Toronto, so I have some optimism
Yeah.
that I'll be able to get back in time for the game.
But
I don't know what kind of
that's a
condition I'll be in.
commitment.
So you're gonna have to carry most of the load on Sunday because I'm going to be sitting a row behind you in seat 33 of the press box.
Well, you can sleep on the plane.
Probably asking Mitchell Blair to get me a cookie. Yeah, but it's tough because it's a 1 hour flight, then a 3 hour layover in Calgary, and then a 1 hour flight. So my worry is that I'm going to conk out in the Calgary airport and end up watching it in the lounge.
I can offer you advice on a man who's taken many early morning flights. I've caught 8 a.m. out of Edmonton, which means you're getting up at 3:34 because Edmonton, Leduc, the airport's nearly in Leduc.
You need a flight to get to the Edmonton airport to get wherever
you're going to sleep in a chair near your gate. So you don't have to just do that. I try to do that so I can, there's action and wakes you up. So there's a little bit of advice from a seasoned traveler who knows something about trying to grab some.
I'll make sure I wake up because I can't bear to be away from my dog for longer than a week and a half. So I mean, a day and a half.
I think we hit just about all our topics, Rob. I think we...
Yeah. So I've got to read the outro.
Yes.
This is my big moment. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Everybody says wherever you get your podcasts. So here we go. If you'd like to send us a question, you can email me at rvanstone@postmedia.com. And we'll read it on the show, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Rob Vanstone or Murray at MurrayLP, wherever you get your Twitter. Exactly. So that's our show for this week. We'll be back next week discussing Roughriders versus Winnipeg and looking ahead to Roughriders versus Winnipeg. For Murray McCormick, I'm Rob Vanstone, and we will talk to you next week. Murray will carry the show because I'll still be recovering from the flight. Take care and have a great week.
Bye, Candy. We didn't see much of you today. Bye.
Her tail made it.
Yeah.
Have a great day.